Hello everyone, I am Haunting Stories, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now, get comfortable and relax. My name is William Tell, and this all went down in 2016 while I was out RV camping in the middle of Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska. I decided to head up there solo for a couple of weeks, just a break from my always-on work life back in Seattle. It felt like a good way to clear my mind and see some rugged places where cell towers hadn't yet claimed the landscape. Honestly, I had no idea just how off the grid I'd really find myself. I parked the RV in a designated camping area near Nabesna Road, figuring the isolation was the whole point. That day, I'd driven hours on a gravel road with almost no one around. I didn't even see another vehicle once I hit the unpaved stretch leading to the park. To be honest, the silence was nice, a pure kind of quiet that's almost sacred. So I set up a little campfire, had a beer, watched the last light fade, and crawled into my sleeping bag inside the RV, expecting just a quiet night. It was around midnight when I heard footsteps. I snapped awake, suddenly aware of every sound outside. I waited, lying still, thinking maybe it was a moose or some other large animal that had wandered too close. But after a minute, the steps seemed too deliberate, too human. They circled the RV slowly, like someone inspecting it. I reached for my phone, only to remember there was no reception. My only company was the emergency satellite phone stashed away under the seat. After a few minutes, the footsteps stopped, and I thought maybe whoever, or whatever, it was had moved on. But as I strained to listen, a soft scratching sound came from the driver's side door. My blood ran cold. Someone was trying to open it. I grabbed a flashlight and pointed it toward the door, holding my breath. The scratching stopped. Then, in the dim light cast by the flashlight, I saw the outline of a man's face twisted into a faint smile through the window. I don't scare easily, but something about that grin sent a chill through me. He didn't look like a regular guy lost in the woods. He was wearing an old, dirty parka with a hood that almost obscured his face, save for that bizarre smile. I froze, not wanting to move, hoping he'd get bored and leave. But he kept staring, his face unmoving. Finally, I gathered the nerve to say, "Can I help you?" The man didn't respond. He just kept watching, standing there with that same unsettling expression. He then tilted his head slightly, as if he were studying me. That's when I noticed he had something shiny in his hand, a hunting knife. I felt a surge of adrenaline. No way was this a friendly encounter. He moved to the back of the RV, and I heard him jiggling the door handle. I knew I couldn't just sit there, so I grabbed a hatchet I'd brought along for chopping firewood. The guy must have realized he wasn't going to get in because, after a moment, everything went quiet. I waited, breathing hard, trying to calm my nerves. Minutes passed, and I started to think maybe he'd given up. I dared to peek out the window, but there was no sign of him. I decided to take my chances and get out to confront him, or at the very least, see if I could spot him from a safer distance. Outside, it was pitch black, except for the faint glow from my flashlight. The silence was so intense that even the rustle of a nearby bush sounded like thunder. I slowly circled the RV, clutching the hatchet, listening for any movement. Then, in the beam of my flashlight, I caught sight of something that made my stomach drop. A freshly dug hole, maybe 6 feet long, near the tree line. I was staring at what looked like a makeshift grave. I took a step back, but before I could react, I heard his voice from somewhere behind me, calm and unbothered. Thought I'd get started on it early. I whipped around, the flashlight trembling in my hand, and there he was, standing a few yards away, his face now fully visible. He was middle-aged, rugged, with a look that screamed he'd spent far too many nights alone in the wilderness. His face was drawn, gaunt, and his lips stretched into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. That's when I saw he wasn't alone. Behind him, two others emerged from the trees, one carrying a shovel, the other a length of rope. My mind raced. There was no way I could take on 3 people with just a hatchet. I was too far from the RV to make a run for it without getting caught. For a brief, desperate moment, I thought about negotiating, but what was I supposed to say? "Sorry, I accidentally parked in your grave-digging spot." The first man stepped forward, closing the distance between us. I took a step back, trying to keep the flashlight on him. He raised the knife, running a finger along the blade as if savoring the tension. "People don't usually camp here alone," he said, voice low. "What makes you so special?" I didn't answer. Instead, I tightened my grip on the hatchet, ready to swing if he got any closer. But just then, I heard a distant sound. An engine, maybe a truck, coming down the road. The man glanced toward the sound, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Without another word, he motioned to the others, and they retreated back into the trees, leaving me standing there alone, heart pounding. I didn't wait to see if they'd come back. I scrambled back into the RV, locked the doors, and grabbed the satellite phone. When I finally got through to the Rangers, I told them about the grave, the men, everything. They said they'd send someone out, but it could take hours for them to reach such a remote spot. By the time the Rangers arrived, the men were long gone. But they found something chilling, a series of shallow graves scattered throughout the woods. They contained the remains of people who had vanished over the years, campers, hikers, even a few locals. The man I'd encountered was a suspected serial killer known to prey on people camping alone in remote areas, moving from park to park, always managing to slip through the cracks. The Rangers warned me that it might be a while before they caught him, but they assured me they'd be on the lookout. I left the park the next day, cutting my trip short. I parked my RV deep in the Black Hills, farther than I had ever dared to go before. The last sign of civilization had been a gas station over an hour back, and now it was just me, the trees, and the silence. And that was exactly what I wanted. Solitude. After the divorce, I craved it like a drug. I needed this trip to remind myself of who I used to be, before the arguments, before the failures, before the loneliness settled in like a slow-burning rot. Out here, surrounded by miles of forest, I would find peace. At least, that was what I told myself. As I killed the engine, the sudden quiet swallowing me whole. I climbed out of the RV and stretched, breathing in the sharp, cold air. The Black Hills were breathtaking. Tall, ancient pines rising like sentinels against the darkening sky. The wind was still. Not even a rustle of leaves. Just silence. I walked around the clearing, feeling the weight of the world lift ever so slightly with each step. This was why I loved the wilderness, the isolation, the escape. But there was something off this time, a heaviness in the air. I had been here before, years ago, but it never felt like this. I shook off the feeling. My mind was playing tricks on me. It had been a rough few months, and I wasn't thinking straight. A couple of nights out here would fix that. I busied myself with setting up camp, though there wasn't much to do. The RV had everything I needed. I lit a fire outside anyway, for old time's sake, and poured myself a drink. I sat on the fold-out chair and stared into the flames, letting the warmth pull me in. Then I heard it. A sound, faint at first, like tapping. I looked around, but there was nothing. Probably just the forest settling. I turned back to the fire, trying to relax, but the noise came again, rhythmic, deliberate this time. I couldn't shake it off. "Animals," I muttered to myself, standing up and shining my flashlight into the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the dense undergrowth. I scanned the edge of the forest, expecting to see a raccoon or a deer, but there was nothing. Just the trees, standing tall, unmoving. I took a deep breath and laughed. I was being paranoid. The first night alone always did this to me, made me jump at shadows. I headed back into the RV, locking the door behind me. That night, I slept fitfully. Dreams of my ex-wife drifted through my mind. Her face twisted in anger, her voice echoing in that same sharp, accusing tone I knew too well. I woke up several times, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. By morning, the feeling of unease still clung to me like a damp fog. I tried to ignore it, pushing myself to enjoy the day. I spent the morning hiking, trying to lose myself in the familiar sights of the Black Hills, but it was hard to shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woods felt off. Too quiet. Too still. I returned to the RV just after midday, planning to settle in and enjoy a lazy afternoon. That's when the real problems began. The generator sputtered and died as I tried to start it up. I cursed, fiddling with the switch, but nothing happened. No power, no lights, and no heat. I wasn't worried yet. I could figure it out. I always did. But frustration simmered beneath the surface. I was already on edge, and the last thing I needed was for the RV to start malfunctioning. I grabbed my toolkit and went outside, working on the generator for what felt like hours. As I crouched next to the RV, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. I froze, wrench in hand, listening. There it was again. Soft, slow steps, like someone was circling me. I whipped around, but the forest was empty. Just the same dense pines, standing silent, watching. "Get it together, Jack," I muttered, turning back to the generator. By dusk, I was back inside. The generator was still dead, and the RV was cold, but I told myself it was fine. I'd built a fire outside, so I didn't need heat in here. I sat by the fire again, staring out into the forest, hoping the flames would chase away the anxiety that had been building all day. That's when I saw them. Shadows, just at the edge of the firelight. They were tall, thin, humanoid, but wrong somehow. Too elongated, too stiff. They stood between the trees, unmoving, watching me. My breath caught in my throat as I blinked, thinking I was imagining things, but they didn't disappear. They were still there, standing in the shadows just beyond the fire. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. No response. The figures remained still, their hollow eyes fixed on me. I stood up slowly, grabbing the flashlight and shining it toward them, but the beam seemed to bounce off the darkness, unable to penetrate the trees. When I lowered the light, they were gone. I stumbled back into the RV, slamming the door behind me. My heart pounded in my chest as I paced the small space, my mind racing with possibilities. Had someone followed me out here? Were they messing with me? I grabbed my phone, only to find the battery drained, dead. The same with my watch. I was completely cut off. I tried to calm myself down, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. I felt like I was being watched, even inside the RV. I peeked out the window, expecting to see those figures again, but the clearing was empty. The fire outside was still burning, casting flickering shadows across the ground. I crawled into bed, wrapping myself in blankets to ward off the chill that had settled in. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was jumping at shadows because of the divorce, because of the loneliness. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I barely slept that night, and when I did, my dreams were filled with strange voices, whispers that sounded like my ex-wife, but hollow, distorted. She called to me from the darkness, telling me to come outside, to follow her into the trees. When I woke, I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. It was morning, but the RV was still freezing. I could see my breath fogging in the air. I had to leave. Something was wrong here, and I wasn't going to stick around to find out what. I threw my things together, ready to get the hell out of the Black Hills. But when I tried the engine, the RV wouldn't start. No matter how many times I turned the key, it sputtered and died. I slammed my fists against the steering wheel, panic rising in my chest. Grabbing my bag, I rushed outside, but as soon as I stepped into the clearing, I froze. They were back. The figures, tall, hollow-eyed shadows, stood at the tree line, surrounding the clearing. Dozens of them now, all watching me, waiting. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The fire had burned out during the night, and the clearing was shrouded in a thick, unnatural fog. I had to get out of here. The figures didn't move as I grabbed my camping knife and marched toward the nearest tree, determined to hack my way out of this nightmare. I had seen strange carvings on some of the trees, symbols jagged and twisted. Maybe they had something to do with this, something to do with the figures. With trembling hands, I drove the blade into the bark, carving through the strange lines. As soon as I broke the symbol, the air shifted. The shadows flickered, and for a moment I thought I heard a low, echoing wail. I didn't stop. I hacked at the trees, cutting through every symbol I could find. The voices in my head grew louder with each slash. My ex-wife's voice, distorted and hollow, begged me to stop, telling me to come into the forest, to let go. But I didn't listen. I couldn't. Finally, when I had cut through the last symbol, the air went still. The figures at the tree line melted away, dissolving into the fog. I stumbled back to the RV, my legs weak, my mind spinning. The engine roared to life on the first try. I sped out of the clearing, not daring to look back. The Black Hills vanished behind me, swallowed by the fog. But even now, as I write this, I can still feel them watching, waiting. The hollow ones never really let you go. You get used to the rhythm of the road after a while, the hum of the engine beneath you, the steady pull of the truck, the highway stretching out like a never-ending ribbon. It's a kind of solitude I've come to appreciate over the years. I'm Luca John, though most folks call me Bear on account of my size, and I've been behind the wheel for a long time. Trucking is simple. You pick up a load, drop it off, and keep moving. That's what I liked about it. But this job was different from the start. I picked up the trailer in Chicago. The client was a slick, suited guy, one of those corporate types. He barely even looked at me as he handed over the papers. "Keep the trailer locked," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "No stops, no questions." I should have known something was off. The pay was double the usual rate. Too good for a straightforward haul across I-80 to Salt Lake City. But I was behind on bills, and after the divorce, well, you don't say no to easy money. Now, somewhere between Kearney and North Platte, Nebraska, in the dead of night, that easy money was starting to feel like blood money. The road was empty, save for the occasional distant glow of farmhouses. Otherwise, it was just me, my rig, and miles of flat highway. Nothing but darkness ahead and behind. My truck's headlights cut through the night, illuminating the white lines on the road, but something about the blackness beyond felt heavier than usual, like it was waiting. I tried not to think too hard about it, just keep driving, get to Salt Lake, drop the load, and forget about it. Simple. But then, the first strange thing happened. The truck's temperature gauge started going haywire, flipping between cold and hot so fast I thought it was broken. First the cab was freezing, then it was sweltering, all within minutes. I pulled over onto the shoulder, popped the hood, and checked the engine. Everything looked fine. I chalked it up to a glitch in the electronics. These rigs are built to last, but every now and then, something acts up. Satisfied I wasn't about to fry the engine, I climbed back in. But as I settled into the driver's seat, I heard it, a soft thump from the trailer. I froze, my hand halfway to the ignition. It was faint, but there was no mistaking it. Something had moved in the back. I forced myself to breathe slowly. It's nothing. Probably just the cargo shifting. Hell, I didn't even know what was in there. But heavy loads can settle like that. Still, a knot twisted in my gut. It was too quiet, too deliberate. For a second, I thought about checking the trailer, but the client's voice echoed in my mind. Keep it locked. No stops, no questions. Fine. I wasn't going to ask any questions, and I sure as hell wasn't going to break the lock. I fired up the engine and got back on the road, but the tension lingered. The temperature gauge flickered again. I adjusted the air vents, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. A few miles down the highway, the radio crackled to life. I nearly jumped out of my seat. "Luca," a voice whispered through the static. I stared at the CB, my heart hammering in my chest. I hadn't heard another trucker's voice all night. The road was dead empty. But the voice on the radio, it wasn't a trucker. It was my voice. I grabbed the mic, my knuckles white around it. Who the hell is this? The static fizzled, then came back stronger, hissing and popping in my ears. Luca, you need to stop. I dropped the mic like it was burning my hand, cursing under my breath. It had to be a prank. Someone messing around on the frequency, maybe picking up my name from a previous broadcast. But that didn't make sense. The only chatter I'd had was hours ago, and I hadn't said much more than where I was heading. As I stared at the radio, a chill crawled over me. Then the trailer thumped again, louder this time. I jerked my eyes to the side mirror, half expecting to see something clawing its way out of the trailer. But all I saw was the dark outline of the rig behind me, its taillights glowing faintly in the blackness. Another thump, followed by a low scratching sound, like nails on metal. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I was getting out and checking the damn thing. To hell with the lock. Maybe the cargo had shifted. Maybe there was an animal in there. I didn't care. I just needed to know. I pulled over again, this time in the middle of nowhere. The road was surrounded by nothing but fields and distant silos. I climbed out of the cab, the cold night air biting at my skin, and grabbed the key from my pocket. As I approached the back of the trailer, the scratching grew louder, more frantic. Whatever was in there, it was alive. I unlocked the heavy padlock, my heart pounding in my ears, and swung open the doors. The smell hit me first, not the musty scent of old cargo, but something far worse. A stench of decay, like something rotten in the dark. My stomach churned, but I lifted my flashlight and pointed it inside. For a moment, I thought the trailer was empty, but then I saw it. At the far end of the trailer, hunched in the shadows, was a figure. It was humanoid but twisted, like its body had been mangled and warped. Its limbs were too long, its skin pale and slick, almost translucent. The thing was huddled against the wall, its back to me, but I could hear it breathing, shallow and rapid. What the hell? I whispered, stepping back, the beam of my flashlight shaking. The thing turned its face, if you could call it that. It was a mess of raw, red flesh, its eyes sunken deep into its skull, staring at me with a mix of hunger and desperation. Its mouth opened into a wet, gaping maw, and a low, guttural hiss escaped its throat. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. My body screamed at me to run, to get the hell out of there, but my feet were frozen in place. The creature moved, its elongated limbs unfolding as it dragged itself toward me. Each step was punctuated by the sickening sound of its flesh scraping against the metal floor. I didn't think. I just slammed the trailer door shut and fumbled with the lock. My fingers trembled so badly I could barely secure it. The thing inside let out a shriek, a sound so unnatural, so piercing, it felt like it was burrowing into my skull. I stumbled back to the cab, my legs shaking beneath me, and jumped inside, slamming the door shut behind me. For a moment, I just sat there, my breath coming in ragged gasps. What the hell had I just seen? What did they put in my truck? I knew I couldn't stay parked on the side of the road, not with whatever that thing was still inside. I had to move, had to get away. But I also knew I couldn't drive that thing to Salt Lake. No way. Whatever was in the back of my trailer, it wasn't going to make it to its destination. I grabbed the CB mic again, my hand shaking. This is Luca Grady. I hesitated, glancing in the side mirror, half expecting to see the creature clawing its way out. I need help. There's something in my trailer. Static. Then, through the crackling noise, I heard it again. Luca, you need to stop. My voice, clearer this time like it was coming from right beside me. I slammed the mic down, shifted into gear, and pulled back onto the road. I didn't know where I was going anymore. Just away. Away from that thing. Away from whatever nightmare I had gotten myself into. As I sped down the highway, the temperature gauge flickered again, this time dropping into the red. The cab grew colder. My breath was visible in the air, and I could hear the trailer groaning behind me. The thing inside was still moving, still scratching, still trying to get out. The radio crackled one last time. "Luca, it's too late." I glanced at the dashboard. Every light was blinking. The engine sputtered as the temperature dropped even lower. I could feel the rig slowing, like the weight of the trailer was dragging it down, like whatever was inside was getting heavier by the second. And then the truck stopped dead in the middle of the highway. The engine cut out. The lights flickered before plunging me into complete darkness. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The only sound was the soft, steady scratching from the trailer behind me. The door handle rattled. Something pressed against the cab from the outside, its weight heavy enough to rock the truck. I didn't turn. I didn't want to see what was trying to get in, but I knew it wouldn't be long before the door opened. That's the last thing I remember. When they found me the next morning, the rig was empty. No sign of the trailer. No sign of the cargo. Just me, sitting in the cab, frozen stiff, my breath still fogging in the cold morning air. I never asked what happened to the trailer. Some things are better left locked away. When I finally got back on Route 2, the radio was silent. No static, no voices, just the empty road and the stars overhead. I never did figure out what happened that night. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was something else. But I know one thing. I don't drive that stretch of road anymore. Whatever was out there, whatever was calling me to that place, is something best left alone. Some things, once you hear them, never stop echoing. I wasn't expecting much when I decided to go camping. I just needed some time away from everything. The endless noise of the city, the constant work, the stress. I figured a weekend in the middle of nowhere would do me good. No people, no obligations, just me and the stars. At first, I had planned on going with some friends, but they all bailed. I didn't want to back out, so I went alone. The plan was simple. Find a quiet spot, park my RV, set up camp, and just be. I found this campsite just off some back roads in Texas. It was far enough away from the nearest town to feel isolated, but not so far that it was dangerous. I figured I'd be fine. The worst that could happen was I'd get a little bored, right? I showed up, set up my RV, and got a small fire going. Nothing crazy, just a few logs to keep warm. I had brought a cooler with some food, a couple of beers, and some books to read. As the night crept in, everything started to feel calm. Too calm, almost. The trees were dead still, the wind barely moved, the kind of silence that feels unnatural after a while. But I shrugged it off. Maybe I was just getting paranoid. It's easy to do when you're alone. I spent the evening just relaxing. I ate a simple meal, nothing fancy, grilled a few sausages, had some chips. I opened a beer and stared into the fire, watching the flames flicker. I remember feeling weirdly calm, despite how silent everything was. But then, around midnight, the silence started to feel oppressive, almost like I was waiting for something to happen. I kept hearing sounds in the distance, something snapping in the trees, but every time I turned around, nothing was there. A raccoon? A deer? Something small? I kept telling myself it was nothing. By around 1 a.m., I was exhausted. I shut everything down, locked the RV, and crawled into bed. I remember thinking as I lay there, this is nice. Too quiet, but nice. My eyes closed, and I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up with a headache so intense it felt like someone had been drilling into my skull all night. It took me a second to focus on what was going on. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the fog out of my head, but it wasn't helping. Then I noticed it. The RV door was wide open. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't opened it. I'd locked it before going to bed. I was sure of it. But there it was. The door standing wide open, the cool night air rushing in, the dim light from the campfire casting long shadows into the RV. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no voices. The world outside was still. It was as if the entire campground was holding its breath. But the headache, it was like nothing I'd ever felt before. I could barely think straight. I sat up in bed, my legs feeling like jelly, my mind scrambling. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I'd just forgotten to lock the door. But the deeper I thought about it, the more I realized something wasn't right. I stumbled out of bed, dizziness hitting me in waves. The air inside the RV felt heavier than normal, like it had been closed up for too long. I moved toward the door, trying to shake off the dizziness. When I reached the door, I looked outside. The campground was still empty, the fire burning low. The RV's steps creaked under my weight as I took a step out onto the dirt. Everything seemed normal at first, but I felt like I was missing something important. I looked back at the RV, and that's when it hit me. I didn't remember the door opening. Not once, not even a crack. And I definitely didn't leave it open. I went back inside, heart hammering. I checked everything. My wallet was missing. I was sure I'd left it on the counter next to the sink, but now it was gone. I checked the windows. They were all shut tight, the curtains still drawn. No one had broken in through the windows, but that still didn't explain the door. I started to feel like I was going insane. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe someone had been here while I slept. Maybe they had opened the door after I was knocked out. That's when I remembered the headache. I hadn't just woken up with a headache. It was like someone had drugged me. A sharp, foggy feeling in my brain that wasn't just from sleep. It felt chemical. Something was wrong. I ran my hand along the vent above my head. The air was warm. A terrible thought struck me. What if someone had pumped something into the RV to knock me out? I started checking every vent in the RV, touching them one by one, feeling the warmth seep through. It hit me that I'd never paid much attention to the ventilation before. There were no signs of a break-in, no marks on the door, no smashed windows. But what if someone had been inside, watching me while I slept? What if they'd opened the door after I was drugged? I walked around the RV again, my mind racing. My legs felt shaky, like I hadn't eaten in days, like I was about to pass out. But something was making my blood run cold. The feeling that I wasn't alone, the sensation that someone had been here. And it wasn't just the open door. That's when I found the small bag under the bed. At first, I thought it was mine, just some gear I'd forgotten about. But when I opened it, I froze. Inside were items I didn't recognize: gloves, rope, a flashlight, a small knife, a bag that looked like it could fit a person's head in it. It was all too planned. This wasn't just a robbery. Someone had been preparing for something worse. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what to do. I could feel my pulse thumping in my ears. I wasn't safe here. Whoever had been in my RV could still be nearby, watching. I grabbed my phone. No signal. Panic surged through me. I needed to get out. I ran to the RV's engine, praying it would start, but it sputtered and died. I tried again. Nothing. Whoever had been here had tampered with it. My legs felt weak, but I knew I had no choice. I had to run. I bolted out the door into the cold night with no clear direction, just away from the RV. My body was sluggish, my brain foggy from whatever they drugged me with, but I couldn't stop. I heard footsteps behind me, too quiet to pinpoint, but they were there. I could feel them. Whoever it was following me. I kept running, my heart pounding, sweat trickling down my forehead despite the chill. I had no idea how far I'd gone or if I was even heading in the right direction. But then I saw headlights. A truck. I waved my arms like a maniac, and thank God, they stopped. The driver helped me into the truck, and I was barely able to speak, my head still throbbing with that unrelenting pain. I tried to tell him what happened, but it was all jumbled. He just listened, confused but kind enough to take me to the nearest town. The police took my statement, but they didn't believe me. They said I was probably just disoriented, that I had overreacted to a simple break-in. They didn't find anything near the RV, no signs of a struggle, no footprints, nothing. I don't go camping alone anymore. I should have known something was wrong the second I stepped out of the RV. The forest around me felt too still. The kind of stillness that makes you question whether the world itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But I brushed it off. I was in the middle of the Sawtooth National Forest, miles from any other campers or hikers. This was exactly what I wanted. Complete isolation. This place was going to make for the perfect series on my channel. Unmarked Trails. I'd call it a deep dive into forgotten paths, places people were too afraid to explore. And this one, it had all the elements of a viral video. No one knew much about the unmarked trail I was hunting, only vague rumors of hikers disappearing and whispered stories of something called the Collector. Something about that name intrigued me. I wasn't one to believe in folklore or ghost stories, but my audience loved them, and that's what mattered. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. I hiked, filmed B-roll footage, and narrated into my camera about the history of the area. The trail I was following wasn't exactly easy to find. I had to rely on a few tips from locals, a vague map sketched by a guide at a general store, and a lot of guesswork. But I found it. An overgrown path cutting into the forest, almost hidden by the surrounding brush. Perfect. This is it, I said into the camera, feeling the excitement bubble up. The Forgotten Trail. I spent that afternoon hiking along it, deeper into the wilderness than I'd planned. Time got away from me, but the sun was still up, casting golden light through the canopy. I knew I had to head back to camp soon, but the trail kept pulling me further. I wanted more footage, more content for the channel. By the time I returned to my RV, dusk was settling in. I set my gear down, sat by the fire I'd built earlier, and reviewed the footage. That's when I noticed it. In the background of one of my shots, there was something. A figure standing just at the edge of the trees. It was faint, barely visible, but definitely there. A tall, shadowy outline watching me. I rewound the clip and zoomed in, but when I played it back again, the figure was gone. Just trees. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I had been alone all day, hadn't I? It's nothing, I muttered to myself, shaking off the creeping unease. Probably a glitch in the camera, some kind of light distortion. I'd seen that before. But even as I tried to rationalize it, my eyes kept drifting back to the tree line, scanning for movement. Nothing. That night, I barely slept. Every little noise made me sit up in bed, ears straining, heart pounding. But the forest was quiet, just the occasional rustle of leaves. Still, that feeling, the gnawing sensation of being watched, clung to me, even as the fire burned down to embers outside. The next morning, I pushed my nerves aside and geared up again. Today was the day I was going to push deeper into the trail. I was determined to find something, anything, that could give my channel the edge I was looking for. I packed my camera, drone, and enough supplies to last until nightfall. As I set off, something felt different. The forest had taken on an oppressive quality. The air was heavier, the light dimmer. The trail seemed to have changed, too. The trees grew closer together, the undergrowth thicker. Landmarks I thought I had passed before were suddenly missing, or maybe I had misremembered them. Either way, I felt more disoriented than I cared to admit. But I pressed on. Several hours into the hike, my camera started malfunctioning. The battery, fully charged that morning, drained rapidly. The drone refused to take off. When I checked the footage I had shot, static filled the screen, blurring everything. My frustration grew, but I wasn't about to quit. Not yet. That's when I saw it again. Ahead on the trail, the figure. It stood between two trees, far enough away that I couldn't make out any details, but close enough to feel its presence. Tall, impossibly tall, and still. My breath hitched as I fumbled for the camera, but by the time I raised it, the figure had vanished again. I stood frozen for a moment, my pulse racing. What the hell was that? I wasn't imagining things. There had been someone, or something out there, but there was no sign of anyone now. No footprints, no rustling leaves, just silence. I should have turned back then. I should have packed up and left. But something deeper than curiosity kept me going. Pride, maybe ego. The need to prove to myself that I wasn't just a YouTuber chasing shadows. I was a professional. I knew these woods. I pressed on, my mind racing with thoughts of how this footage, real or not, could be my breakthrough. I could see the thumbnails, the titles, the cursed collector trail, captured on film. It would go viral, guaranteed. But as the hours dragged on, the trail seemed to twist and turn in ways that didn't make sense. I wasn't sure how far I had gone anymore. The sun, which should have been high in the sky, seemed to hang low, casting long shadows earlier than it should have. And then I heard the whispers. At first they were faint, barely audible over the crunch of my boots on the dirt. But the deeper I went, the clearer they became. Voices, indistinct, like a conversation just out of earshot. I stopped, straining to listen. My heart thudded in my chest. Ryder. The voice was soft, almost gentle, but hearing my name sent a cold shiver down my spine. I spun around, scanning the forest, but there was no one. Just trees. And then there it was again. The figure, closer this time. It stood in the shadows, tall and unmoving, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. I took a step back, my breath quickening. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be real. Ryder. The voice was clearer now, coming from the figure. My legs felt heavy, frozen in place as I stared, unable to look away. It didn't move, didn't approach. It just stood there, watching. I fumbled for my camera, hands shaking, but when I hit record, the screen flickered and went black. The battery was dead again. My phone, too, completely drained, though it had been fully charged that morning. Panic surged through me. I turned and bolted down the trail, my feet pounding the dirt. But no matter how far I ran, the forest seemed to stretch on forever. The landscape twisted around me, trails splitting off in directions I hadn't seen before, paths looping back on themselves. I was trapped. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against a tree, my head spinning. The whispers hadn't stopped. They circled around me now, growing louder, more insistent. Come deeper. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of fear clouding my mind. I wasn't going to let this happen. I'd survived worse. I just needed to think, to get my bearings. But then I saw it. My camp. The RV. I stumbled forward, relief flooding through me as I reached the clearing. But something was wrong. The RV looked different, older, like it had been sitting there for years, weathered and decaying. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. This wasn't possible. I had only been gone a day, 2 at most. But the way the RV sagged, its windows cracked, and the rust that ate away at the metal, it felt like I'd been gone much longer. Ryder. The voice was right behind me. I turned, and there it was, the collector. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its shadows stretching toward me, its eyes glowing brighter now, like embers in the dark. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Ryder, come with me. The collector's voice was a low whisper, soft and inviting, pulling at me, urging me to follow. It took a step forward, and I could feel its presence, heavy and cold, as though the very air around me had thickened. No, I choked out, my voice barely audible. The collector's eyes burned into me, its shadow growing longer, reaching out. I stumbled backward, finally breaking free of the paralysis that gripped me. Without thinking, I turned and ran. My legs burned as I sprinted into the trees, away from the RV, away from the trail. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees twisting and shifting as I ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. The whispers followed me, echoing in my ears, growing louder and louder until they became a roar. But I kept running, pushing through the exhaustion, the fear, the disorientation. I didn't stop until the first light of dawn broke through the trees. And when I finally did, I realized I had made it out. The forest lay still behind me, the whispers were gone, and the collector was nowhere in sight. I was alive, but I didn't feel relief, only emptiness. I left the Sawtooth National Forest that day, my RV abandoned where the forest had claimed it. I never posted the footage. There was nothing to show anyway, just static, shadows, and whispers. And sometimes late at night, I can still hear the collector calling my name, waiting. The road into the Adirondack was long, winding and empty, just how I liked it. After a few hours of driving, I pulled the RV off the narrow trail and into a small clearing by the lake. The pines stretched high and thick around me, their dark green needles blending into the overcast sky. This was exactly what I needed, complete isolation. No people, no noise, just the quiet of the forest and the sound of my own thoughts. I parked the RV, turned off the engine, and stepped outside. The air was cool, crisp, with the faint smell of pine and damp earth. The only sound was the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant ripple of water. Perfect. This place would give me the quiet I craved, a chance to think without the distractions of civilian life. Ever since leaving the military, I'd been chasing peace, and this felt like it could be the spot where I'd finally find it. I grabbed my gear and went about setting up camp. It didn't take long. I'd done this enough times to know the routine. Gather firewood, get a small fire going, and make sure the RV was ready for a night out in the wilderness. As I made my way through the trees, something caught my eye. On one of the nearby trunks, there was a strange marking, a crude carving of a figure, long and thin, etched into the bark. I frowned, running my fingers over it. Just a kid's prank, I figured. Probably a bored hiker from weeks ago. But as I moved through the forest gathering wood, I found more of them, carved figures on the trees, all tall and slender, stretching higher than any human could reach. It was strange, but I wasn't here to think about strange things. I was here to forget. By the time the sun set, the fire was crackling softly, casting flickering light across the clearing. I settled in next to the warmth, staring out at the darkening forest. There was a peace in the solitude, something comforting about being alone with the sounds of the wilderness. But as the night wore on, I started to notice something. The forest was too quiet. No rustling leaves, no night animals scurrying about, just silence. And then, just beyond the edge of the firelight, I heard it. A soft rustling sound, like something moving through the underbrush. I sat up, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. Nothing. The beam of light cut through the trees, but there was no movement, no sign of anything unusual. I shook my head. "You're just on edge," I muttered to myself, trying to dismiss the tension building in my chest. The wilderness could play tricks on you if you let it. I knew that better than most. I was here to clear my head, not to let it run wild. But then I saw it. At the edge of my vision, just for a split second, something moved, tall, thin, just beyond the trees. I jumped to my feet, gripping the flashlight tighter, and aimed the beam toward where I'd seen the figure. But there was nothing. Only the dark outline of the pines swaying slightly in the wind. I stood there, heart pounding in my chest, every muscle tense, waiting for something to step out of the shadows. But after a long moment, the rustling stopped. The trees swayed, and the forest fell back into its unsettling quiet. I forced myself to sit back down, staring into the fire, trying to shake off the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. The next morning I woke early, determined to shake off the nerves from the night before. I grabbed my gear and decided to hike deeper into the woods. Maybe if I put some distance between myself and the campsite, I could clear my head. The trail was faint, barely more than a thin path winding through the trees. As I walked, I found more of the carvings on the trees, each one stranger than the last. They were everywhere. Slender, elongated figures with no faces, all staring outward, all watching. The forest felt darker here, the canopy thick enough that the sunlight barely broke through. About an hour in, I reached a ridge overlooking the valley. The view was stunning. Endless trees stretching out below, the mountains rising in the distance. I was about to pull out my camera when I heard footsteps behind me. "Morning," a voice said. I turned to see an older man, probably in his 60s, standing a few feet away. He was holding a bundle of firewood in his arms, his face weathered and sun-creased like someone who'd spent his entire life outdoors. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, giving him a nod. "Not many people come this deep into the forest," the man replied, his voice low and rough. He looked me up and down, then glanced toward the valley. You camping nearby? Yeah, just over by the lake, trying to get some quiet. He gave me a long look, his expression unreadable. You should be careful. This part of the Alder Andax, it's different. Different how? I asked, raising an eyebrow. He glanced around, his eyes flicking nervously toward the trees. There's something in these woods. People call it the Watcher. It stays deep in the forest, watching from the shadows. You see it once, and you'll start seeing it everywhere. I laughed, shaking my head. Local ghost stories. The man didn't smile. It's not a story, it's real. People who see the Watcher, they don't come back the same. He took a step closer. I'm telling you this because you look like you've seen things. You know when something's not right, and something's not right here. I met his gaze, feeling that familiar knot of unease tightening in my gut. What do you mean? You'll know when it's close. You'll hear it first, and then you'll feel it, he said, turning and starting back down the trail. Just don't stay too long. I watched him go, his words echoing in my mind. Part of me wanted to laugh it off as superstition, but the way he'd looked at me, like he'd seen the same thing I had last night, made it hard to dismiss. That evening back at camp, the unease was worse. The forest felt like it was closing in, the trees towering higher than I remembered, the shadows deeper, darker. The wind had picked up, making the fire flicker and sputter, but it didn't drown out the sounds. The rustling came back, louder this time, and with it, something else, footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the campsite. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the darkness, but the beam barely seemed to penetrate the trees. The footsteps stopped as soon as the light hit them, but when I moved the beam, they started again. I stood, turning in a slow circle, the flashlight in one hand and my knife in the other. My pulse was pounding, adrenaline kicking in. Every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone out here. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see anything. And then, just beyond the firelight, I saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing between the trees. Its body was almost skeletal, its limbs too long, its head bent slightly as if it were watching me from above. Its eyes, or where its eyes should have been, were hollow, dark pits that stared right at me. My blood ran cold. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move, it just stood there, watching, its presence pressing down on me like a weight. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice shaking despite myself. The figure didn't respond. It stayed still, silent, its form almost blending into the shadows. I raised my knife, backing toward the RV. The figure remained at the edge of the light, watching, waiting. I reached the door, yanked it open, and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. For hours, I sat by the window, knife in hand, waiting for the figure to move. But it never did. It just stood there, barely visible in the darkness, its hollow eyes fixed on the RV. At dawn, the figure was gone, but the carvings had multiplied, dozens of them surrounding the campsite. The same tall, thin figures etched into the trees like a silent army. I didn't waste time. I packed up everything, threw it into the RV, and started the engine. As I drove away, the carvings seemed to watch me, following me down the narrow trail, their hollow eyes staring. I didn't stop until I was miles away from the area, the forest shrinking in the rearview mirror. But even as the trees thinned and the road stretched out in front of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Watcher was still out there, somewhere in those woods. It was still watching, and maybe it always would be. My name is Harry Bell, and back in 2011, I found myself deep in the wilds of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, looking for a bit of solitude and maybe a good fishing spot. I've always preferred the company of trees over people. Not that I'm antisocial, just that nature doesn't argue back. I'd packed my gear, loaded up my old Jeep, and decided to take a week off from my job as a mechanic in Knoxville. The drive to the park was uneventful. the kind of peaceful journey where the miles slip by and the radio's static becomes comforting background noise. I arrived at a lesser-known trailhead, one that a buddy had tipped me off about. "Best trout you'll ever taste," he'd said, swearing me to secrecy. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as I started down the path. About an hour into the hike, I came across an old wooden sign, half swallowed by moss. "Carter's Creek, 2 miles. Perfect. The trail narrowed, branches occasionally snagging my backpack as if the forest were playing little pranks on me. I laughed it off. Better the trees than my coworkers with their endless jokes about my so-called hermit tendencies. As I got closer to the creek, the sound of rushing water grew louder, accompanied by the distant call of a hawk. The serenity was exactly what I'd been craving. When I reached the water, I set up camp nearby, pitching my tent on a flat patch of ground and gathering stones to make a fire pit. By late afternoon, I'd caught a couple of decent-sized trout and was roasting them over the flames. The taste was everything my friend had promised and more. Just as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the water, I noticed something odd. Across the creek, about 50 yards upstream, a deer stood frozen, its ears perked and body tense. It wasn't drinking or grazing, it was just staring into the dense thicket. I followed its gaze, but saw nothing unusual. Must be a predator nearby, I thought aloud. Circle of life and all that. I settled back down, but an uneasy feeling crept over me. The deer bolted suddenly, disappearing into the trees with a swift grace that belied its size. Shrugging it off, I tossed another log onto the fire and pulled out a book, figuring some reading would take my mind off the eerie stillness that had settled in. Night fell, and the sounds of the forest changed. The chirping of birds gave way to the hum of insects and the occasional hoot of an owl. I crawled into my tent, leaving the fire to burn down to embers. Sleep came easily. Sometime in the middle of the night, I awoke to the sound of rustling outside. Probably a raccoon drawn by the scent of cooked fish. I ignored it at first, but then the rustling turned into a heavy crunching of leaves and snapping branches. Whatever it was big. "Great, a black bear," I muttered, grabbing the flashlight and the bear spray from my pack. I unzipped the tent just enough to shine the beam outside. The light cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees but revealing nothing. The sounds had stopped. "Hello?" I called out, feeling a bit foolish for talking to a wild animal. Silence. Then a low rumbling sound echoed from the darkness. Not quite a growl, but something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It reminded me of the noise a large dog makes when protecting its territory, but deeper, more primal. "Easy now," I whispered, gripping the bear spray tighter. I scanned the area with the flashlight, moving it slowly from left to right. For a moment, I thought I saw a pair of eyes reflecting back at me, but they vanished as quickly as they appeared. Deciding that discretion was the better part of valor, I retreated back into my tent and secured the zipper. Sleep wouldn't come, so I sat there, listening intently. The forest had gone quiet, too quiet. No insects, no owls, nothing. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As dawn broke, I emerged from the tent to survey the campsite. Everything seemed in order until I noticed footprints by the dying fire. They were unlike any tracks I'd seen before. Large, with an odd shape, almost like a wolf's but much bigger. "Well, that's not in any field guide," I said, snapping a photo with my phone. Maybe I could look it up later or ask one of the park rangers. Shaking off the night's events, I decided to spend the day exploring further upstream. The sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating patterns on the forest floor that danced as the wind moved the branches. I found another promising spot and cast my line, letting the tranquility wash over me. Around midday, as I was reeling in a particularly feisty trout, I heard a scream. Not an animal's cry, but a human scream, echoing through the trees. It was cut short abruptly. Dropping the fishing rod, I grabbed my pack and headed in the direction of the sound. "Hello? Anyone out there?" I called. No response. I pushed through the underbrush, branches whipping against my arms and face. After about 10 minutes of scrambling, I stumbled into a small clearing and froze. There on the ground was a backpack, torn to shreds. Scattered around it were clothes soaked in blood and a crumpled map of the park. No sign of the person who owned them. This doesn't look like a simple accident, I thought, my heart pounding. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but had no signal. Typical. The smart move would be to head back to my campsite, pack up, and make for the trailhead. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of something hanging from a low branch, a tattered piece of fabric fluttering in the breeze. It looked like part of a shirt, stained dark. A sense of dread settled in my stomach. I needed to alert the authorities. I retraced my steps, marking trees with my knife to find the spot again if needed. Back at my campsite, I hastily threw everything into my backpack. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Every snap of a twig made me jump. Get a grip, Ezekiel, I told myself. Just a couple of miles to the Jeep. I set off at a brisk pace, constantly checking over my shoulder. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming before, now felt oppressive. About halfway to the trailhead, I came across footprints similar to the ones I'd seen earlier, but fresher. They crossed the path and headed deeper into the woods. A chill ran through me, not from the air, but from the realization that whatever made those prints was circling me. I quickened my pace, almost breaking into a jog. Then, ahead on the trail, I saw something that made me stop cold. Another hiker was lying face down on the path, motionless. I approached cautiously. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out. No response. As I got closer, the scene became gruesomely clear. The hiker's clothes were shredded, and there were deep gashes along his back. The ground was stained. I fought back the urge to be sick. This was no animal attack. Not any animal I'd ever heard of. A rustling sound came from the bushes to my left. I turned slowly, and there it was. A massive creature stood partially obscured by the foliage. It was covered in dark, matted fur, standing on two legs like a human, but with the head and features reminiscent of a wolf, or perhaps a bear, but not quite either. Its eyes were fixed on me, intelligent and predatory. I didn't wait to find out what it wanted. I bolted down the trail, adrenaline fueling my legs. The sound of heavy footsteps crashed behind me, gaining quickly. Come on, I urged myself, lungs burning. I spotted a fallen tree ahead and ducked behind it, hoping to throw the creature off. Peering through a gap in the logs, I saw it enter the clearing, sniffing the air. Up close, it was even more terrifying. A nightmare amalgamation of man and beast. It moved slowly, deliberately, scanning the area. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure it would hear me. Then, from another part of the forest, a gunshot rang out. The creature snapped its head in that direction and let out a sound, a mix between a howl and a roar that shook me to my core. Taking advantage of the distraction, I crept away from my hiding spot, careful to keep low. I made it back to the trail and continued running. Minutes later, I burst into the parking area where my Jeep awaited. Another vehicle was there, a ranger truck. Relief washed over me. A park ranger stepped out, hand on his sidearm. "Whoa there, what's going on?" he asked, noticing my disheveled state. There's something out there," I gasped. "I found a dead hiker, and some kind of animal is chasing me." His face turned serious. "Show me." "Are you kidding? We need backup." "Sir, I can't call in anything without verifying. Now, where did you see the body?" Realizing he wasn't going to budge, I agreed to lead him back, hoping that daylight and his firearm would offer some protection. As we retraced my steps, I kept glancing around nervously. The forest seemed even quieter than before. We reached the spot where I'd found the hiker, but the body was gone. Only a dark stain on the ground remained. "I swear he was right here," I insisted. The ranger looked skeptical. "Maybe you're dehydrated, or..." A sudden noise interrupted him, a guttural sound from behind. Before we could react, the creature lunged at the ranger, knocking him to the ground. I stood paralyzed as the beast slashed at him. The ranger's scream snapped me out of it. I grabbed a large branch and swung it at the creature's back. It barely flinched, but it was enough to divert its attention. "Run!" I shouted, though the ranger was beyond hearing. The creature turned its gaze to me, blood dripping from its jaws. I backed away slowly, then threw the branch directly at its face. It snarled and charged. I sprinted through the trees, leaving the trail in a desperate attempt to lose it. Branches tore at my clothes and skin, but adrenaline numbed the pain. Up ahead, I saw a rocky outcrop, a small cave entrance. Without thinking, I dove inside, squeezing through the narrow opening. The creature crashed against the entrance, too large to follow. It clawed at the opening, furious. I pressed myself against the back wall, the stench of damp earth filling my nostrils. After what felt like hours, the sound subsided. Cautiously, I peeked outside. The creature was gone. I made my way back to the parking area, keeping to the shadows and moving as quietly as possible. The ranger's truck was still there, but he was not. I didn't waste any time. Jumping into my Jeep, I fumbled with the keys before finally getting the engine started. I tore out of there, gravel spraying from under the tires. On the drive back to Knoxville, my mind raced. What was that thing? How could it exist without anyone knowing? Once home, I contacted the authorities. They organized a search party, but no trace of the ranger or the missing hikers was found. Just the torn backpacks and bloodied clothes I had described. Unsatisfied, I started digging. Late nights were spent combing through local legends, police reports, and old newspaper clippings. I discovered that over the past few decades, there had been sporadic disappearances in that area of the park, all unexplained and quickly forgotten. Some articles mentioned sightings of a large, unidentified animal. A few even hinted at a government cover-up, but those were dismissed as conspiracy theories. I compiled everything I found and handed it over to a journalist friend, hoping he could bring attention to the matter. In the end, official reports chalked up the incidents to unfortunate accidents. Bear attacks, hikers getting lost in the wilderness. But I knew better. The Great Smoky Mountains held a secret, one that prowled the depths of the forest under the cloak of night, an apex predator unknown to science. As for me, I've traded camping trips for quiet weekends at home. Nature, it seems, has its own mysteries, and some are best left undisturbed. I've always liked the quiet of the road. No one asking questions, no one poking into your business, just miles of highway, the hum of the engine, and the occasional crackle of a distant voice on the CB. But that night, somewhere on Route 50 in the middle of Nevada, the silence felt different. Too quiet, too heavy. It had been days since I'd had a decent break. I'd left San Francisco with a load of building materials bound for Kansas City, figuring Route 50 would cut the travel time. They call it the loneliest road in America, and I've driven it enough times to know why. For hours at a time, you don't see a soul, just endless desert dotted with mountains that never seem to get any closer. I was more tired than I wanted to admit, the kind of tired that sneaks up on you, where your eyelids grow heavy and the lines on the road start to blur. Normally, I'd push through, but something told me to pull over this time. I glanced at the clock and decided to hit the next rest stop I saw. A quick nap, I told myself, and I'd be good as new. Relief washed over me when I spotted the weathered sign for a rest stop 2 miles ahead. The stop wasn't marked on my map, which was odd, but these old highways have plenty of places that don't show up anymore. The place looked like it hadn't seen a decent coat of paint in a decade. The lights above the parking area flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. A beat-up picnic table and a few rusted trash bins were all that marked the stop. The restroom building sat off to the side, its windows dark, and the air around it felt heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I pulled the rig into the lot and killed the engine. Silence settled around me, pressing through the windows. Leaning back in the driver's seat, I rubbed my face. I just needed a few hours of sleep and I'd be good to go. But before I could settle in, nature called. Typical. With a sigh, I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of the cab. The night air was cold, much colder than I'd expected for Nevada, and the wind carried a strange scent, dry, with an underlying hint of something rotten. I wrinkled my nose but kept moving toward the restroom. The building was worse up close. Graffiti covered the exterior, but it wasn't the usual stuff. No names or crude drawings. These were symbols. Spirals, triangles, strange geometric shapes I couldn't quite place. Some of them were carved deep into the wood, like they'd been there a long time. I pushed the door open, and the smell inside hit me even harder, stronger than before. I flicked the light on, but the bulb overhead just buzzed and flickered weakly. I turned on my flashlight and swept it across the room. The place was empty, as I expected, but the walls were covered in more of those symbols. Dozens of them, carved into the tiles, drawn on the mirrors. I did my business quickly, trying to ignore the feeling that those symbols were watching me, and made my way back out to the parking lot. That's when I saw the first figure. It stood just beyond the reach of the flickering lights. A man in a heavy coat, his back to me, staring out into the desert. For a second, I considered calling out to him, but something about the way he stood there, so still, so quiet, made my gut twist. I stopped in my tracks, debating whether I should just get back in the truck and go. But the man didn't move. He didn't even seem to notice I was there. Maybe he was just another trucker, but I hadn't seen another rig on the road in hours. I took a step back toward my truck, keeping an eye on the figure. When I reached for the door handle, my fingers brushed against something cold. Too cold. I pulled my hand back, confused, and shone the flashlight on the handle. Symbols. Those same spirals and triangles were scratched into the metal of my door. My heart started racing. I hadn't seen them there before. I would have noticed. I swallowed hard, scanning the lot, but the figure was gone. Just vanished. I fumbled with the door, pulling it open and climbing back into the cab as fast as I could. I locked the doors and sat there, trying to steady my breathing, trying to shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I had driven across the country dozens of times, stopped at every kind of rundown, creepy rest stop imaginable, but nothing like this. The radio crackled to life suddenly, nearly making me jump out of my skin. For a second, I thought it was just picking up static, but then a voice broke through, low, distorted. Ankle. My heart skipped a beat. I snatched the CB mic. Who is this? Silence. I stared at the radio, waiting, but the voice didn't come back. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but the sound of my name, it was too clear. I glanced out the window again, half expecting to see the man in the coat, but the lot was empty. The only movement was the weak flicker of the overhead lights. Still, that rotten smell lingered, hanging in the air like a warning. I was about to start the engine and get the hell out of there when I noticed something in the rearview mirror. There was another figure now standing near the restrooms. This one was closer. I couldn't make out their face in the dim light, but they were staring right at me. Not moving, not blinking, just watching. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but when I reached for the ignition, the engine sputtered and died before it could even turn over. I tried again. Nothing. The lights on the dashboard flickered weakly before going out altogether. "Come on," I muttered, trying to stay calm. "Don't do this to me now." I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. No bars, no nothing. The figure was still there, closer now. Another figure appeared near the picnic table, and then another by the trash bins. They didn't approach, but they were closing in, little by little. My mouth was dry. I fumbled for the flashlight and shone it toward the restroom, hoping to get a better look at the figures. The beam of light cut through the dark, but when it hit the first figure, they were gone, just gone. I swept the light across the lot, but all the figures had disappeared, every single one. I didn't waste any more time. If my truck wasn't going to start, I'd fix it in the morning. For now, I just needed to get out. Out of here. On foot if I had to. I grabbed the toolbox from under the seat just in case and jumped down from the cab. That's when I noticed something else on the side of my truck. Etched into the paint was one of those symbols. Fresh. I could smell the metallic tang of scratched metal. It was the same spirals and triangles I'd seen in the bathroom, the same ones that had been on the door handle. The smell hit me again, stronger now. I turned, shining the flashlight toward the restroom, and that's when I saw it. The symbols were glowing. A faint, sickly light pulsed from the walls of the building. The carvings and scratches were now alive with some kind of energy. The ground beneath my feet vibrated, a low hum building in my chest. I stumbled back toward the truck, my flashlight shaking in my grip, but the lights in the building grew brighter, casting long, flickering shadows across the lot. And then I heard the voice again. Ankle. I whipped around, scanning the empty lot, but there was no one there. No figures, no man in the coat. Just the voice, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Ankle, you need to stay. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I kept moving, trying to get back into the cab. But the symbols, they were on my truck now, glowing with the same eerie light. The handle felt like ice under my fingers. The wind picked up, howling across the lot, carrying whispers with it, low, urgent voices layered on top of each other, impossible to understand, but they felt old, ancient. I was frozen in place, trapped between the truck and whatever the hell was happening in that restroom. The lights, the symbols, the voices, I didn't know what to make of any of it, but I knew one thing. I had to leave. Now. The truck groaned as I climbed back into the cab, and I turned the key one last time, praying it would start. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life. Without another thought, I slammed the truck into gear and floored it out of the lot, the tires skidding on the cracked asphalt. The rest stop disappeared in the rearview mirror, the glowing lights and symbols fading into the distance. As I drove down the highway, my hands trembling on the wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped. The silence of the road was back, but it wasn't the same. The weight of those symbols, the voice, it lingered. And I knew deep down that whatever was tied to that rest stop wasn't finished with me. I don't stop on Route 50 anymore. Not after that night. Some places are better left in the past. That's it for today's tale from Haunting Stories. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, The Haunting Stories thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the haunting awaits your return.